Hello, my name is James Banks. I'm here from the SRUC, Scotland's Rural College, to talk to you about COP26 and whether or not it was successful. So a lot of people were really quite excited and happy about COP26 and were saying that it was going to be great. It was going to be the real thing that was going to make a positive difference and make everybody really happy that we're doing something positive about the environment and the way forwards and perhaps deal successfully with the climate emergency. But an awful lot of people were really quite grumpy about it, cynical you might say, and really not expecting that an awful lot would happen about it. So what I'd like to do today is to talk a little bit about that, a little bit about perhaps the positives and the negatives, and hopefully to find out what the results of COP26 might be. So first of all, it had four main goals, and these were set out beforehand, and this was a United Nations agreement across the whole of the world. So there were four main goals, which were to try to secure global net zero by 2050. I'll talk a little bit later about exactly what that means or what perhaps we think it means. Also about preparing to adapt so that human communities could be protected, but also natural habitats. So it's very much about trying to look after people and wildlife in the places that they live. The third key goal was that they needed to or wanted to mobilise finance, and there were an awful lot of people talking before the conference about how we could release money to try to make sure that people around the world could help to deal with the climate emergency. So the secret to COP26 is really trying to work together to try to deal with or to solve the climate emergency. So that's basically what it was all about. So it's four main goals: to work together to make sure that enough people have money so they could look after the communities, the natural habitats, but also the main intention was to try to secure global net zero by 2050. A lot of people say, well, COP26 is about trying to deal with global warming. And I think there's still an awful lot of people who perhaps are not very convinced that global warming sounds like a bad idea. Think about Scotland. Well, we've got palm trees and we've got some beautiful white beaches, but we're not exactly a tropical sort of a place. And yet maybe if we've got global warming, we'll become a lot more warmer, a lot more pleasant, and maybe people will be coming to Scotland for their beach holidays. I couldn't resist this picture because it's got a beautiful mountain with a cloud on, which is what you often get, of course, in Scotland. So the point about global warming is that the temperature across the whole planet is supposed to get warmer, as it says on the tin, I suppose. But is that really a problem? Are we really going to get lovely tropical conditions? A lot of scientific work has put together some ideas and some models about how global warming might affect the planet, and perhaps quite hard to see, but if you can look at these four images, this is put together from a lot of different scientific research. And the expectation is that this is how we think the world will warm relative to the temperatures from 1850 to 1900. And the fact that is most interesting perhaps about this or these diagrams and these ideas is that it shows that the warming isn't going to happen across the whole of the world, not in the same way. There are some areas, mostly in the middle of the world, so around the equator and the southern part perhaps, is that the temperature won't increase very much. But in the far north, the temperature is going to increase an awful lot. And you can see in the fourth picture of the world on the bottom right hand side is that there are large parts of Canada, the Arctic, Scandinavia are going to be more than 7 degrees warmer than the average 100 or so years ago. And that's even though the whole planet will increase by 4 degrees, it's suggesting that these places will increase much more. So the warming, we think, will not be the same across the whole planet. And that means we'll get different weather conditions, because it's the different heat that means that we have the way that the wind and the rain move around the world. And so if we've got changes in the way that the heat is around the world, it means that we'll get changes in weather patterns. And as we've already been seeing in the last 10 or 15 years, we're getting a lot more strange weather, heat waves, firestorms, torrential rain, flooding, all sorts of big problems. And the problem is basically that we have emitted too much carbon dioxide. And this really is what COP26 was set up to address. It's the 26th climate conference set up by the United Nations to try to deal with global climate change, the climate emergency. And this is an emergency because we are seeing radical changes. And we're seeing these radical changes, as far as we can see, because we've been releasing so much more carbon dioxide. And that's a result of using fossil fuels and a whole range of other factors as well. This set of information is quite important because it shows that China as a country is releasing over 11,000 megatons of carbon dioxide per year. The United States, over 5,000. The European Union, which does include the UK in these data, over 3,000. India, 2,500, and Russia, nearly 1.8 thousand. So an awful lot of carbon dioxide is released by these countries every year. But you can also see it's quite different depending on which country we're speaking about. So per capita, the Chinese are releasing about 8 tons of carbon dioxide and its equivalent greenhouse gases every year. People in the United States, over 15 tons per year, which is quite different. And you look at the difference, for example, between the average Indian person, which is releasing 1.2, and the average person in the United States, which is releasing almost 8 times as much carbon dioxide per person. What is also interesting, what was quite sad at the climate conference, the COP26, was that the president of China did not attend and the president of Russia did not attend. And yet these are 2 of the most important countries involved in the climate emergency. The United States, they took a leading role, so did lots of countries in the EU, and so did India. Although it is definitely true that the Indians did block some of the major climate agreements that were going to happen. So there's lots of issues and lots of problems. What was supposed to happen is, if we look at the science so far, that we have this graph that shows what we think is going to happen in terms of warming. So our historical warming has gone up from the gigatons, or as a result of the gigatons of carbon dioxide that have been released. So in the year 2000 to 2020, it's gone up from 40 gigatons to over 50 gigatons. Now, if it continues with what we think at the moment and what was before COP26, we thought it was going to be in the top blue line, which says with current policies, increase in temperature as a result of the carbon dioxide will be 2.7 to maybe as high as 3.1 degrees Celsius. With the agreements reached at COP26, we now think that the global temperature will now reach 2.4 degrees C from what it was in or before 1950. We've got some optimistic targets, which might mean that it gets lower, but what has been agreed and the idea of the COP before it started is that we should keep 1.5 alive. And that means that we should try to keep the warming of the atmosphere across the whole world as no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above before the industrial age. So what that means is that we will be able to reduce the carbon dioxide that we release so that the temperature will come down. We'll reduce and reverse the warming that we've already had. That's what this graph is trying to show. And this is really what COP26 was all about. So the aim was to get to 1.5 degrees. This all comes about from the Paris Agreement that happened in 2015. But we wanted to get to 1.5. Before COP26, we were looking at 2.7 degrees C, but now we think that we're probably going to be at 2.4 degrees C. So that's where we are at the moment. So the idea is that we'll reach net zero by 2050. What does that mean? That's difficult. It means perhaps we should stop digging up and using coal. It means we should perhaps be using a lot more renewable energy, not using petrol or diesel in our vehicles, maybe just using electricity. But maybe it means we need to just plant an awful lot of trees. So what is net zero? Net zero refers to the fact that there are some processes that release carbon dioxide and some processes that absorb carbon dioxide. And it's not just carbon dioxide that we need to be concerned about as well. It's also methane. Methane is another gas that absorbs infrared radiation in the atmosphere, and that causes heating. And that's the issue. It stops heat from the surface of the world from being lost into space. So if we can reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, so we're not adding any more than we're taking away. So what adds carbon dioxide to the atmosphere? Burning. Decomposition. So decomposing peat, for example, releases methane and carbon dioxide. Decomposing trees, dead trees, release carbon dioxide as they decompose. The process of respiration, what all animals are doing, breathing out carbon dioxide. But what is taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere? Well, it's nearly and almost completely down to photosynthesis. So plants absorbing that carbon dioxide to make the molecules, make the chemicals that they need. So if we can stop destroying forests, we can stop the decay of peatlands, and we can encourage more trees, then we will be able to absorb more carbon dioxide. But we need to stop burning fossil fuels and releasing carbon dioxide. So what was agreed at COP26? Many things were agreed. And the first and perhaps the most important thing was that they really wanted to keep this idea, this goal, that we should allow the temperature of the whole planet to increase by no more than 1.5 degrees. so keeping 1.5 alive. Now, they couldn't agree legal rules for that to happen. So what they did agree was that they would meet next year for COP27 in Egypt to try to be a bit more clear, make some more firm commitments about reducing the way in which we emit carbon dioxide. And as part of that, we've agreed that we will reduce the coal that we use. And coal is perhaps the biggest single most important source of fossil fuel and atmospheric pollution. Over 100 countries also agreed to reduce methane production. Methane, as I said, is another carbon greenhouse gas that helps to keep heat in the atmosphere, and in many ways it's worse than carbon dioxide. It just doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long, and it can be broken down more quickly. They've also agreed they'll provide over $100 billion per year to help the poorer countries in the world, those countries that are most vulnerable to climate change, by 2023. They also agreed that they will try to stop deforestation by 2030. So these are things that have been agreed. But these things that they've agreed are not legally binding. These are aims, these are ideas. As Greta Thunberg might say, it's a bit of blah, 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 perhaps, because nothing is legally binding. Good agreements, some good ideas, some good intentions. That's certainly the case. So, of those 4 main goals that this started with, have they agreed that they can secure global net zero by 2050? Well, not entirely. They've agreed to aim to do that, but they haven't put anything that is legally binding in place. And India, the 5th biggest emitter of carbon dioxide, has said that they'll try to get to net zero by 2070. Have they agreed to protect communities and natural habitats? Well, they've certainly agreed to work towards that, yes. Have they mobilised finance? Well, they did agree that they would provide $100 billion per year to help poorer countries with climate issues to do with rising sea levels, to do with changing weather patterns, flooding and things like that. So they have done that, but they did originally say that that was going to happen by 2020. And now they're saying that's going to happen by 2023. So not bad, but not as was promised. And certainly a lot of the poorer countries and those countries who have got very low-lying islands, so these are communities, these are countries that are essentially almost in the sea. And so if you have sea level rise, this could be a major, major problem. They have agreed that they will work together. That's certainly the case. And they have got lots of agreements and ideas in place to work together. So that's a good thing too. But before COP26, with what people had said, we were going to aim for 2.7 degrees rise in temperature. Now, after COP26, we now think that if we carry on as we are, it'll go to 2.4 degrees. So, not perhaps a success. Not if we want to keep 1.5. So, what can we do? Well, the UK government has made a very firm legal commitment that we will be net zero by 2050. The Scottish government, interestingly, have said 2045. So they're trying to be more ambitious than the UK government. And even more interesting, Dumfries and Galloway Council have declared that they want to become net zero by 2025. So in about 3 years' time, Dumfries and Galloway are intending that will not be releasing any more carbon dioxide than everything in Dumfries and Galloway that is reducing carbon dioxide, which mostly is to do with trees. We're very fortunate in Dumfries and Galloway that there are a lot of trees, and they are going to be putting in more money to try to improve and develop more trees, more woodland, looking after the soils, and also trying to store and capture carbon in different ways as well. Dumfries and Galloway Council have also tried to reduce the amount of emissions that they've got. So they've got rid of some of their more polluting vehicles and buildings, and tried to, they have increased the number of electric vehicles they've got. So there are lots of issues and interesting questions. What I'd like you to do is to think what you can do personally, because it's very true that even though big countries like China and Russia and the United States are releasing lots of carbon dioxide, we're all in it together. We all have to help. So what can you do? What can you do at school? What can you do in your communities or at home? It's very easy to get really, really sad about the climate emergency. I think it's very, very important to try to stay optimistic, maybe even become more optimistic. We've improved things, we've developed things, we've changed. We are working together. So it's not good, but it's not as bad perhaps as it could be. The BBC at the COP26 put some ideas together that suggests that of the things that you personally can do or people can do in their own homes, these are some of the most useful things that you can do. So if you can live without a car, which is quite difficult in a lot of places, that would save 2 tons of carbon dioxide per year. If you can have a battery car, that's almost as much, 1.95 tons. If you go on long haul flights every year, if you could stop those, or at least reduce them, that would make a difference. If, and this is a big question with all the problems we're having in energy, in gas and electricity supplies in the country at the moment, if you can get renewable energy, you can save 1.6 tons. Use public transport. Improve your home, so do more insulation. Eat much less meat. You don't have to become a complete vegan, but if you eat less meat and drink less milk, that will help. If you heat your house, not with gas or electricity, but with a heat pump, that can make a big difference. Interesting, the way you cook and use kettles can help. And if you're trying to heat your home with renewable fuels, that can make a significant difference too. So there's some really good ideas there, some of which are easy to do, some which are really not very, but we can at least think about them. I teach the wildlife and conservation management at SRUC near Dumfries. And what I'm trying to do is to help people to learn about wildlife, to learn about how they can make a difference, and also to get outdoors and enjoy exploring some of the beauties of Scotland. And the more we understand about the world in which we live, the more we care about it, the greater the difference we can make. And certainly in Scotland, the Scottish Government are particularly thinking about how, as a country, we can really work together to try to deal with the climate emergency. So the more you understand about it, the better place you will be to have a really good career. And that's what we're trying to do at SRUC. So if you're interested in these sorts of topics, then do search for SRUC Conservation, and you never know, there might be the course just for you that you might think, yeah, that's going to be great, that'll be really interesting, and it can make a difference too. A little bit more detail about what options we offer. So we have the National Certificate, the Level 5 in Countryside Management, offering modern apprenticeships, HNCs and HNDs, as well as honours degrees as well. So there's lots of information and a lot of possibilities for you there. I've talked quite a bit about climate change and the COP26, and I've written a Kahoot that you might like to have a go at as well. And if you log onto the website and use that code, that will help as well. And it'll give you perhaps some more fun questions that you can have a go at and to test your knowledge and understanding of COP26 and what's happened. I've also got a challenge for you. Dumfries and Galloway want to get to net zero. Scotland wants to get to net zero. So does the United Kingdom, and really so do most people in the world. There are 4 possibilities other than planting trees in Scotland that can make a really big difference. What I'd like you to do is to choose one of these 4 areas and see whether you can explain how we can sell those ideas to ordinary people. If you put together a presentation, might be a website, might be a poster, I don't really mind, but you can sell the idea of restoring peat bogs or seagrass meadows or something called biochar. If you can really sell one of those ideas to the Scottish people and you submit it to me, and I've got my email address here, if you can do that by the 10th of December, you're in with a chance of winning £100 of Amazon vouchers for your course or your group at school, or £50 if you're highly commended. So by the 10th of December, what I'd like you to do is choose one of these 4 less well known about options that we could do in Scotland. So you've got to be really persuasive. You've got to really try and sell it to somebody. You need to make sure that people understand your idea, and you can add something interesting, something weird, something challenging, a bit of detail. And I'm going to judge it on 4 things. Have you persuaded people? Have you got some good science in there? Is it creative? Is it interesting? Is it clear? And if it is, then go for it. So that's what I'd like you to do. So thank you very much for listening, and very best of luck. And take care. We know there's no planet B, but we can look after our own planet. And people are kind of doing a bit more about it. So it is a bit more optimistic. Thank you very much, and goodbye.